Hello and welcome to Coffee and Catholics, a Catholic women's talk show podcast. I'm Stacy, one of your hosts, and with me I have...
Hi, I'm Alicia.
I'm Annie.
And I'm Lauren.
Hello, welcome to Coffee and Catholics. This week we're going to be talking a little bit about talking with our children about social justice teaching, and particularly about transgenderism. And we have a guest with us today. We have Nancy, and you might know her from Catholic Sprouts or the Domestic Church Project. And Nancy, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started on our conversation today?
Sure. So I am Nancy from Catholic Sprouts. We have 6 kids. We live outside of Minneapolis. And for, almost 5 years, I've been recording the Catholic Sprouts podcast, which is a daily podcast for Catholic kids, because it is difficult to catechize our children when life is happening. So I needed help from a podcast, so I made it, and my kids listen to it every day. And so it's just been really nice to hear from so many families out there that needed that help too, that I wasn't the only one that was failing to catechize in a good mood. So it's nice to have my recorded voice is always much more patient than my voice in real time with my kids.
Oh, same.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of where things started. And the Holy Spirit, when you put him in the driver's seat, you sometimes end up at crazy places. So we have started creating liturgical studies for families based on the different liturgical seasons, and we always try to create things that are whole family and that can be parent-led in the home for formation of our kids, because that kind of is the fundamental thing that we at Catholic Sprouts try to promote, is just that parents be the primary educator of their children's faith. Mm-hmm. Parishes do great work too, but the parents got to be involved. Mm-hmm. And so we've done lots of things. But the new thing that we're really excited about that we've been working on for 2 years is our book called Catholic Social Teaching for Youth. And it covers all 31 topics that the USCCB lay out. And we gave this book an extra year to get a full imprimatur and Neil Olmsted from the Archdiocese of Minneapolis-St. Paul, because my oldest is 12, and I most certainly want something that I can trust to teach them. And I don't necessarily want to have to read the whole text and trust my own education to discern if it is trustworthy. I wanted that, boom, stamp approval from the church. Okay, we're good to go. Pick it up and go. So that's what we have been pouring ourselves into for the past 2 years. And I am so excited because my oldest is 12, and it's we got to take these issues head on, all of them, even the scary ones, like transgenderism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and so your oldest is 12, and I kind of shared with you, and I'll share with our listeners, that my oldest is also 12, and we homeschool, but we are involved in a lot of other groups that we interact with kids that are in public school, private school, and are also homeschooled. And so, one of his friends is kind of exploring, exploring how their identity, and there are some issues there where they were wanting to be called the different pronouns than what their sex is. And so, but it was getting really confusing because nobody knew what pronoun that this friend wanted to be called. And so but they were getting offended. And so it's been so we've had to talk a little bit about this. And what was interesting is this happened. And then you contacted me, and then you sent the book. And I was like, oh, this is what I need. So I was like, this is exactly what I needed, because we talk about how God made you a certain way, and that's beautiful, but people can sometimes have confusion about that and how they feel about that. And we have to walk with them and still speak truth to them, but also acknowledge that they're hurting. And
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, so what was really interesting is we pulled, we have a kind of a large audience at Catholic Sprouts. And so we sent out a survey and we were like, okay, here's like the maybe top 10, like difficult moral topics. We're like, how confident do you feel knowing what's true on this, So, and like the people that we talk to, they're like you guys, they take their faith seriously. They know things really well. So like a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I know that 10, I'm a 10 out of 10. But what was really interesting is after I sent that, I was like flooded with emails from people that were like, okay, I know what is true, but I don't have confidence that I can tell my children about this in a way that will communicate charity for the person.
Yes.
And I thought like that was really interesting. And that's like a really, I think like that's the problem. Like we all take in news enough. We all are serious enough about our faith where we know what is true. But how do you teach it with compassion where it's not just like this hypothetical truth out in the world, but it's about that person that your son knows. But anyway, so did you ultimately have a conversation with your son about this?
Well, yeah, and we've had some like similar conversations before then because my son is M4H, and so he also, but he likes to do things like sewing and cooking and things like that. Sometimes like he would get a little uncomfortable about like he was going to get made fun of for doing those things because those are girl things or so we have a lot of conversations about how society will sometimes put gender on activities, but just because you like those activities doesn't make you those that gender. I'm like, you're allowed to like different activities, but but that the things that we do don't necessarily dictate who we are. So we've had these conversations kind of building up to this, I guess, in a way, but it just kind of hit home real quick. And, because I grew up, speaking of theater, I grew up in the theater and working in theater, and I have a lot of friends there in this community. And, but then when you're talking to your kid about it, it's like, I know, I walk with my friends and they're still my friends, and they know that we have differing opinions and we still love each other, or, there for each other. But at the same time, trying to get my kids to understand this truth about themselves and their bodies, but also how to interact with other people in the world. And yeah,
definitely. So with the book, one of the unexpected parts of the journey of writing this book is because we didn't want it to just be like catechism quotes, because the truth of the matter is, like, all of us that have internet access, we have the catechism at our fingertips. So we have all of the answers, like what does the church teach on same-sex marriage? You can find that answer really quickly. But I know from my own education as a kid, like a child they need more. They need the truth, and then they need it in context, and then they need to like get in touch with why this is a violation of God's beautiful plan. Like we always need to be like going back to the beautiful, like setting, like fully painting the beautiful, and then setting this by its side so that they can see it. And so one of the really interesting parts of this is like the first section in each of these 31 topics is like, this is the truth. And then we take on the lie in the next one. It's like, what are the lies the world tells us? And then we reinforce the truth. And so it was really interesting to like pull these lies out. Like, what is it? Because we're bombarded with them all the time, and I feel like the transgender messaging is so strong right now, and it's all about this quest to define myself, like no one can define me. I am me. And like, I even change and I have control, like even my creator, I am more in control of defining myself than he is, and it's, and I'm sitting here as a 41-year-old, like still with like identity crises myself, so it's not, I'm not saying like this is their problem. This is like the human experience problem. And so it was really interesting to look at all of these, because it's like you could look at everything. Like, what is the lie that that convinces people to be pro-choice? What is the lie that convinces, people to mistreat workers? All these things. It's always this like common wound that we all have. This hunger, when you could really simplify it, and it's us. It's this disconnection from God and quest for God in the wrong direction. But it was really interesting to just like dig, like scratch away that stuff and see like what is the wound that we all share. And so it was really interesting because, transgender to me feels like perhaps the scariest of the topics in this book, and it also feels like something I'm trying very hard to keep at arm's length away from my kids. Like when we're, considering watching a new movie, we always are like scanning for weird gender things and things. Mm-hmm. But just to like dig beneath the surface and see that there's this wound that like really is a commonality across all human beings that just kind of is the seed that has grown into that was really, it was powerful for me. So
I think it's really cool what you're saying. I think this is a different way of approaching this. I think it's unique, and I think it's the most faithful way to approach it. What you're saying is there's a lot of us and them rhetoric.
Exactly.
And you're saying that's the opposite of what this is. This is we. This is a human problem. This is germinating, to use your seed analogy, in your life in a different way than it's coming up in mine. But I struggle too. What is the root of identity? What is the root of human identity? It's rooted in the Creator. Like, this is good, solid, scientific, classic logic and reasoning. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, in a lot of the Catholic media that is out there on this, there's a real distancing and a coldness in the presentation. And I find that yours is warm and
that's so great
and cohesive. And I love that. I mean, that's just so, we kind of feel like outsiders in the way that we have presented this because we present it like what you're saying, but that's rare. So it's so lovely to like hear you say, this is a human issue. This is not you over here struggling with this weird gender thing. You and I are finding who we are. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And let me accompany you. Let me struggle with you. Let me suffer with you through this struggle, the way I'm suffering in my own struggles.
Absolutely. Well, and I would say that is the piece that is missing, the accompaniment, and like the will, like this, it's so frustrating, right? The word tolerance, which I think is like the word that has taken over, just that I'm going to tolerate same-sex marriage. I'm going to tolerate transgenderism, but that really is such the easy way out of these things that I'm just going to be like, oh, okay, you do you. I'm not going to get messed up in your junk and I'm going to stay over here. Like, that's not love. And that's not, and so like, that is really the message, because what I hope my children will gather from this, of course, I hope they discover God's beautiful plan, that there is a plan, but I also really hope that they are empowered to realize that when you stand before Jesus Christ in judgment, He's not going to just judge you on what you did and what you did, like, oh, did you commit these sins that are laid out in this book? He's also going to hold you accountable for what you did not do. Mm-hmm. Like the people in your life, did you just let them wallow in sin? Or were you brave enough to the people, whose souls you are responsible to be caretakers for, your friends, your cousins, your siblings? Like, were you brave enough to speak truth? To go and rescue them from these things? Because frankly, I'm really tired of living in a world where we just let people wallow in sin. Mm-hmm. And, I'm pointing a finger at myself at the same time, because, how many of us have dear friends that we love to death that have been living with some guy for endlessly, and never going to marry them. And I'm just like, when am I going to get my act together and be like, this isn't God's plan for you? Mm-hmm. And you might hate me, but someone needs to tell you that. And as your friend from college for 20 years, it should probably be me. It's just like, I just think it's time to be brave. Yeah. And it's a scary time to be brave because we don't live in Christendom anymore. Right. We're definitely on the minority to have a Christian worldview. But anyway, I just, if things are ever going to change, we have to be brave and we have to be equipping our children for battle, because really that's what we live in now.
We recently just had made a comment in one of our previous podcasts that Jesus, because one of the arguments you hear is, how would Jesus act to treat this person? And
WWJD.
And Jesus would be loving with them. I mean, we see it in the Bible. Jesus is dining with sinners,
seeking them out,
and going to find them, and not caring what the Pharisees thought of him for being with them and breaking bread with them. But he also told them, don't do this anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I was just saying, I know that like you're talking about this, and I get this like pit in my stomach, and I'm like, oh crud, I'm failing so much at this, like, that's like, it's not so much just my kids. Like I try and teach them, but what am I doing myself? Like, what am I doing in my own life of reaching out to those who aren't just in my own circle, and then I get that pit in my stomach and there's like chills. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to hell.
There's that Catholic guilt for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Got in spades over here.
Well, I think, who was it? Was it Fulton Sheen? I mean, he's like, yeah, I hope you can be motivated by heaven, but if not, at least be motivated by hell. And I'm like, well, one or the other, right? No, and I mean, I don't think the Lord really ever wants us to, to have extreme anxiety or to, and okay, like my mother, whom I love to death, is out there telling everybody all this stuff all the time on Facebook, in Facebook threads. And I'm like, that is not the way to do that either.
Can we say that louder for those Facebook in the back? That is not the way. Right. That is not the way.
Oh my goodness. I know. I mean, I mean, maybe there really are people that are convinced to be pro-life by a crazy 70-year-old woman in a Facebook thread. I don't know. Maybe. That's her ministry, I guess. But anyway, I just think that's, because it's hard for us to speak up on these things. And the truth is, it's going to be even harder for our kids, the way things are trending. Mm-hmm. So we got to be brave. We got to teach them to be brave, and we got to show them how to be brave.
Right.
And
and I love how you say that. You should not just teach them, but show them how to be brave, because it really is about having that confidence in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I wanted to go back to where you called this, like, we're talking about like the human problem, and I just loved how you worded that. It's just like, this is the human problem. I loved you were talking about how you kind of had set up the book. And each of them, but one of my favorite sections in there is your call to action that you have at the end. You have some discussion, and you have, you didn't speak about this yet, but there's talking about a different saint for each of these topics that follows along with it. I loved that. Mm-hmm. But I loved in your call to action on the transgenderism section about seek authentic discovery, and that, talking with your kids and with ourselves, like, this is something that each of us needs to be, taking to prayer, and that when we're struggling with our identity, struggling with all these things, that it's not us just trying to figure it out on our own. It's that we are seeking our identity in Christ and through Him. And I just thought that was beautiful, how how you put that in that, like, that these are our call, like, this is what we're called to do. These actions we're supposed to take. And first and foremost is trust that Christ knows you better than you know yourself. And I just love that.
Yeah. And again, this was like a powerful thing for me, because you think, okay, abortion, like, call to action, go protest, write a letter to your senator. Like, I'm not going to say those things aren't important. Like, I am there with you, sister, holding that banner and signing that letter, 100%. But it's also like, go into your quiet room and make sure your junk is in order too, make sure, because on all of these issues, even if they feel really far flung, what's interesting is that, like you said, there's this wound underneath all of them. Like, even terrorism, like, if you dig, what is the wound here that makes people do that? Ooh, like, that feels like something I could be part of, So it's like, if you're going to go out and be a missionary, you got to make sure that you are equipped, So let's equip ourselves and go out and do it. So one of my, I love that you like the call to action. The part that I love of this book the most is probably because it was it came together really on its own. So the first section is truth. The second section is lies and how the truth responds to that. The next one is Jesus, how Jesus speaks truth. And so what was really interesting is like some of these sections, Christ really spoke very directly on. You know, I mean, like the death penalty. Yeah, he was, you know, he died at a capital offense. But there's other ones like transgenderism. This was not an issue when Jesus was alive. He did not encounter transgender people, and he didn't speak about it. So, like, how do we find something that Jesus says to this? And so, like, this section actually took a tremendous amount of prayer. My editor and I, like, prayed very deeply about each of these. And it was really beautiful how, like, when you really think, okay, the wound really is this quest for identity, this, like, feeling like I don't have an identity, or maybe God got my identity wrong or something. And then, like, one Sunday in Mass, it was the Zacchaeus reading, which is the story that we used here. And, like, what a powerful story about someone that the world was defining. Like, they had all these definitions for him. He was a tax collector. He was short. He was greedy, you know, all these things. All these identities put on him. And that this, through a true encounter with Jesus Christ, he is, like, he receives his true identity as a son of Israel, as a son of God, you know, and his inheritance is set. And I love Zacchaeus. He's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. But it just is like, yes, like that doesn't look like the transgender issue in our world, but it is. Like it's this same thing. And I just felt like that happened in this book over and over again. It's like, oh, did Jesus really talk about animal rights, you know? No, but like just seeing him ride into Jerusalem on a donkey and how that donkey was foretold and the dignity of that animal is like, wow, he really spoke to that. And I don't know, you know, the Gospels are just so rich. I just feel like there is so much truth in there, in these simple, and it's always with Jesus encountering someone, you know, with this encounter where someone is changed, and it's always the person. So that to me is like when I look through the book and page through it, I just love the Jesus sections because there's so much truth there.
Yeah, I was reading through it and I saw that and my thought, I'm reading, I was like, oh yeah, that's a good connect. That's right, because of the identity thing. And I never, like, when I read it, I was just like, oh yeah, that totally plays in. But then when you as you say this and say how much it took you to try and figure it out, I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been hard, but it really does. Like, and like there's so many stories. That's like how Jesus was. It was changing. It was teaching them their identity founded in him. And several of us, and I know many other people are fans of The Chosen. And I know like there's such a emphasis on that because that's what it is in the Bible. Like it's, you know, emphasis on this, that these encounters is that the identity of these different people who have, you know, who like, you know, I think about Mary, and her, not Mary Mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and how they show her kind of going back and like these different things, but it's that there's this big thing in there about how she's changed. Like this is not her identity. That was who she was, is not her identity. And like that is such a great point, and that so many of these stories we hear of these depictions of these encounters of Christ in the Bible are him reaffirming their identity as a child of God. And like, that is where they're at. And it's, you know, or like, you know, Matthew is, he's not, yes, he was a tax collector. We don't know, but that's not who he is. That was what he did, but that's not who he is.
I think it's interesting too, that when you look through the Gospels and the encounters that Jesus had with people, when he is trying to speak to them about who they are, it's always in the lens of, it's not in a vacuum. And I think that's what we're seeing here with identity definitions today. identity seems to have changed from something that is discovered within and throughout your community and your relationship to other human beings, through service to other human beings, through the giftings and the charisms in your life. For much of human history, that was what identity was. It was wrapped into your family, into your history, into your natural giftings and abilities. And now it's the singular thing that has to do with what you feel and what your appetites are. And that is a departure from almost all schools of thought and psychology, theology, philosophy. It doesn't even make any sense, literally. So I think that this project that you're doing, this way that you're using the accompaniment and the entire human family as a body together, discovering who Jesus says we are, not who we think we are individually, is a powerful antidote to this singularism that we're seeing.
Yeah, that is so interesting, isn't it? It's baffling to think about, like, that in this generation we feel like we know better than a millennia that came before us, you know, that, like, it's startling, you know, that, like exactly what you said, that human beings, you know, because we are social beings, we discover who we are in relationship. Always. That's always how it's been. And now it's like, no, we're telling a teenager to go into a dark room with a phone and figure out who they are. How could you ever possibly do that in a healthy way? So it's quite troubling.
Well, so since you and Annie talked a little about your favorite parts of the book, mine are the parts with the saints. I like the witness to truth, and in that section you pick a saint, and for transgenderism it's Saint Joan of Arc, who is one of my saints. My middle name's Joan. So, but I loved at the end of that little section how you said the incredible story of Saint Joan of Arc should remind us all that we are so much more than the way we dress or style our hair. Also, the opinions of others don't change our identity. Our true self can only be known and lived out through a relationship with Jesus. And I love that, because then also later on in your call to action, you talk about respecting your body. And, you know, going back to, like, I was growing up, I would be considered a tomboy. I grew up with two brothers. You know, we went hunting and we did all the things where we're climbing trees and so, you know, sometimes the climbing would be in a dress, but a lot of times it was not. And I'm covered in dirt, and, you know, and I think it's important to that distinction that it's okay, because the way you dress and the things that you do don't define who you are. And I think that's
also the way that you feel. Another lie defines who you are.
Feelings.
Exactly. Exactly. And, you know, St. Joan of Arc has been held up by the transgender community as like the patron saint of transgender, right? And every person deserves a patron. And I am most certain that St. Joan of Arc is on there, you know, fighting for good in all ways. But just the idea that she would ever think she was anything other than a woman is just bizarre. You know, I'm like, I don't think she ever was confused about who she was. And so, I mean, because that's really my hope is, you know, I feel like a lot of people, the people that I know that are struggling with transgenderism, that have even made the full transition, just they're suffering with serious confusion. And that's such a difficult and painful place to be. And so,
and a lot of time there's been a lot of trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
That hasn't been addressed in a healthy way. In my experience, with loved ones who are having issues with, or are dealing with this same sort of confusion, there's that like standing and saying, this is what I believe, and this is the truth. And I'm not going to compromise that, but I understand, like, I see you and I love you, and I'm here for you and walking with you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to assist you or support you
Yeah.
in that way. I will support you as a person because that is what you deserve.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And, so I've never been, I know lots of people kind of in the secondary level that have done the transgender thing. But so for years, I was an inner city high school English teacher, and I was the only teacher at a very small school where it was a contract alternative, which is what we call it in Minnesota, but very rough. Most of the kids there were homeless or parents or whatever. And so since I was the only female teacher, when girls were pregnant, they would come to me, and all of them but one had an abortion while I was there. Only one listened to me when I was like, there's other ways, I'll help you. But to me, like, that was actually a really formative experience because, like, obviously I was willing to do anything to help them keep those babies, but they had their minds made up, and really some of them were just in the most impossible situations. Not that ever excuses it, but, just to be like, to know these people, to know them, to know their pain, and to know, like, this is a choice made out of pain. Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're going to come back. Like, it doesn't mean I'm going to drive into the abortion clinic. And it doesn't mean when you come back on Monday, I'm going to high five you. But it does mean that I'm going to hug you because I know, like, this is so painful, and I'm going to try to persuade you another way until the very last moment.
Right.
But I mean, I just think, like, we always need to remember, like, these are choices made out of pain. And, and our God sees that pain, and we all are making sinful choices out of pain. I'm not going to claim that I'm not. Yeah. But anyway, it's so difficult. It's so difficult. And if we don't approach it with love, then then the devil's won, really.
Exactly.
So
more isolation.
These things are hard and heavy. Hard and heavy.
Yeah. So one of the things that I feel like we said over and over again today was that anytime we're dealing with any of these types of issues, or we're trying to speak truth to people, we always have to come from it from the angle of love. Yeah. And that's first. And I loved one of the things that you said in here that while we need to remain grounded in truth, we always we can never forget that love and care for those who are suffering comes first, basically. And so, yeah.
Yeah. It's such a balance, isn't it? Yeah. Because it's like love, and I just think it's like, we really do need to keep that as our primary vocation, to be like, okay, love. In this moment, love means for me to just hug you and cry with you. Okay, in this moment, it means that I need to share the truth and, like, try to rescue you from lies that you believe. And so it's just this constant discernment. And it goes back to, like, what we were talking about before, is that, like, we absolutely cannot do this without Jesus, because he constantly needs to be helping us discern what is love in this moment. Is love to just accept a person and hug them? Is love to, I don't know. I mean, it's so very changeable, and Jesus is the only one that can navigate through that, I think.
Yes.
I think it's also important for us to remember that it's not our jobs to change people's hearts. We can plant seeds, and we can be examples, and we can tell the truth, but then we have to move out of the Holy Spirit's way.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. Yeah. And that's hard, especially when it's someone that you love, Yeah. I mean, like, I have a little brother that I want to go in there and fix him top to bottom.
Girl.
But I just need to, I know, I just need to be like, all right, he's that choice. Jesus loves him as much as he loves me. I've said what I'm going to say, and I'm going to back away. Right. Maybe. Maybe. I'm going to try for a while. Anyway.
What did you have?
Well, and I think it's important, too, that we make sure that we have that right word, love, like you're talking about, making sure that we discern. Because I think the way that the world is dealing with these issues of abortion and transgenderism, all of these different issues that are so prevalent in our society right now, is like they're coming at it from what they think is love. They're looking at these women who are going through difficult situations, and most of them are very compassionate towards these women. At people who are dealing with gender dysphoria, and they're going, oh, you're suffering. Let me alleviate the suffering. And this is the way that I think that we ought to do that. And so I don't think that, I think a lot of people are coming at these issues from a place of compassion, concern, and love for these people. But like you're talking about, like, as Catholic Christians, we need to make sure that our love is rightly ordered towards a solution, towards a kind of an accompaniment with people who are going through these things, and a love that is directed by what Jesus tells us is correct to do, rather than maybe what the world is telling us to do.
Absolutely. And all of those things, like with abortion, with transgenderism, like, speaking truth means that then we need to follow through and do the hard work with them, like that girl that I counseled, and she did not have an abortion. It was like years of investment of my life then for that one child. And, and the same is true with transgender. Like, is it years of counseling? Is it, like, what is not just a quick fix? So like, that is what true love is, to walk through the hard times that will come afterwards, not just the Band-Aid. So, and I think that I really do feel like if we're going to really stand up and speak these things, we need to be willing to do the hard work on the other end.
Yes.
And so,
and if we're talking about it, like, I know we've talked a lot about, like, with dealing with, like, friends of our kids and everything, but also, like, helping with our kids understand their own identity. But when they're struggling, recognizing that they are struggling, and that, like you said, there may be those years of counseling, those different things, like, that you need to walk with your kid through. And it may be that you need to be in counseling with your child to better the communication, understand your own identity through Christ, and to help them through whatever experiences or whatever is going on at school, whatever's going, all these different things that are playing into this crisis of mind that's going on. And not just saying, well, I'm going to send you, you're going to go to counseling, and they'll figure it out. But, like, really taking that step and recognizing that this is not just a you issue. This is an us issue.
Yeah. And I'm willing to investigate my own wounds with you,
because I love you.
Scary. Yeah.
And is there something that we have done to contribute to some of this identity dysphoria? I think that's what parents are afraid of. They're afraid to look in the mirror and say, is there something I need to do here? Or maybe I didn't do, I'm not blaming that. I'm just saying that I think we have, as parents, we need to be super vulnerable about this.
And on the other side of the coin, not having that guilt of, like,
it's not about us.
Right.
It's about our child. That love looks out.
And that if it is something from our own wounds, there's nothing to feel guilty about that.
Of course not.
We all have wounds. Like you said, this is a human problem.
Walk together.
I mean, because I can really get fancy when, I'm a big fan of Dr. Bob Schutz. I don't know if you guys have read his books. Like Be Healed, Be Transformed, all those books. And, a lot of times he talks about wounds, and then, like, you can read it in one angle and be like, what are the wounds I've received from my parents? But I read one of his books one time through really thinking, what are the wounds I'm giving my children? And it was horrible. I had to stop. Because it's like, we don't have any control. And a lot of times something that isn't, I can react and yell at my kid because this other terrible thing's happening that they don't know about, and it can wound my child. And so, it's like exactly what you're saying, being vulnerable. It's not like we know the ways that we're wounding our child, and it's the Holy Spirit is the one that's really taking over here, because we're imperfect instruments for sure. So just being vulnerable to, like, yep, Lord, I made mistakes. I'm entrusting them to you. Let's just, you fill in the gaps, because there's a lot. So,
Amen.
Beautiful.
And so I want to thank you for coming and talking to us about this today. And we just talked about one topic, but in Nancy's book, there are 30 more. So, it's all very well laid out, helping parents talk about these issues with their kids. And again, the book is a Catholic social teaching for youth. And it would be great if we could delve into the whole thing, but there's a lot to, and so we just chose to pick this one for today. And but we really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about this.
And our listeners can look to our show notes. We'll link it in there, and also all of Nancy's different endeavors through Catholic Sprouts, her other podcast, Just One Small Thing, and the Domestic Church Project. We'll have those all in our show notes for our listeners.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
Great.
We're praying for you.
And whether people get the book or not, I mean, the truth is out there. There's many ways to access it. I guess I'm just really on a mission to challenge parents to own these conversations. Like, be the one that if your child is in junior high and you have yet to have the sex talk, it is time. It is time. And, I think that is scary, but I think we kind of need to get over it and realize that, like, we're Catholic. We know that God has a beautiful plan for sex and marriage. It is not dirty. It is beautiful. Yeah. And we need to share that beauty with our children before they get out into the world and it's all like lust and blah, like, own it, because we know what is true and they will not get this message anywhere else. And it is so important for their future happiness, for their future as parents, as spouses, that they get this message, and they need to get it from you. So there's plenty of resources out there specifically on sex. All you have to do is get a book. Like, I recently had the sex conversation with our 10-year-old. I do the girls, my husband does the boys, and I literally just opened up the book and read, and she asked questions, and I answered them. And it's awkward to say the words. Totally awkward. It's never going to be natural, but it needs to come from you. So there. That was my little soapbox speech at the end.
May I ask which book you used?
Yeah. So it's a series of books. I think the first one is called The Story of Me. The Story of Me, which is supposed to be for like little kids, actually. And then the next one, but that's a series. If you look The Story of Me up on Amazon, you'll find them. There is a whole series. And they really encourage you to start young. And it's just like because, like there's two ways to go with sex, right? You can go like Puritan, like, oh, it's dirty, yuck, don't talk about it. Or you can go like Las Vegas, like, and I think like we're so used to bouncing back and forth between those two that we forget, wait, there's truth and beauty right here in the middle. Right. And that's where we should be, So I just think like, let's own those conversations. And like, I also, it's a balance. We don't want to take away a child's innocence, but I would rather introduce this to my child. And like, when I told my daughter about it, she was like, what? Why would you ever do that? And I'm like, right. I love that that's where your mind is at. I love that. But it's important, because I mean, we all were exposed to things happen, and she will be, despite my best efforts. And I just wanted her to have that foundational piece. And it's amazing how important it is, because like just the other day, we have a girl that comes and helps out sometimes with childcare, and she's pregnant and not married. And our kids knew that. And, like, my little ones are like, how is that possible when she doesn't have a husband? And even my 10-year-old, who I'd had the sex talks with, was like, how is that even possible? I'm like, well, we've talked about the sex act, and like, that's how. But you can, but it's amazing because she has that context, and I could be like, but you can see how that's not how God had wanted it to be. Right. Like, we're going to help her. Yeah. She's going to be okay. She's going to have a beautiful baby. But you can see how that's outside of what God wanted, And so it's just nice to have that foundational piece. And then you can talk about real life people as you encounter them. Right. So anyway, not to go on a whole other tangent.
Oh, we could talk all night, I'm sure. But
yeah, I know. But this was such a joy. You guys have such a beautiful community, and it's so fun to be part of it for a night.
Thank you so much. We really love just getting to speak with you, and I know that I'm a little bit fangirling.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. I was thinking the same. I was like,
they totally are.
Like,
so am I.
Oh my goodness. Well, meet people that know me in real life. They don't think I'm anything too special. So, but I love communities of Catholic women. I love places where people aren't afraid to share what's deeply on their heart, and other women that are not afraid to challenge them when they've gone amiss. So I just think it's so beautiful. I hope everybody has something like this, a beautiful community. So it's been a joy. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and being with us. Yeah. We're all big fans, so it's exciting. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
You too. Thank you, guys.
And as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Join us again in 2 weeks. Until then, may God bless you and may Mary accompany you. Coffee and Catholics is a proud partner of the SmartCatholics Podcast Network. Find new shows to love, meet like-minded Catholics, and join the community at smartcatholics.com.